You can't buy what you give us tonight. God bless you, thank you.
The Moody Blues!
Cold-hearted Homer ditching his wife, while ancient Ned runs for his life.
Chips of red and blue and white, but we decide which...
Can the poems, it's arse-whooping time.
I want Fatty.
Since you gotta go, oh, you better go now. Go now, go now.
The story of the Moody Blues is the story of an early 60s Birmingham R&B group, born out of the US blues skiffle invasion, that evolved over the decades in both personnel and musical style to become one of the world's most successful and longest-running bands. With over 60 million records sold and 500,000 still selling every year, their legacy and influence continue to be felt today. Birmingham, like most of Britain, had returned to peacetime normalcy after the end of post-war rationing in 1954. By the mid-1950s, the teenagers in Birmingham, like those throughout England, were starting to listen to new and different sounds coming from America.
That was when the folk wave began in 55, 56, around then. So that was when we really started dabbling in trying to put bands together, that kind of thing. So it really started with the skiffle thing.
We heard something that we liked and we wanted to be a part of it. And skiffle at that time was the way forward.
Birmingham, in the early days of the music, we didn't really realise what was going on. I mean, we were young and we learned to play guitars and join bands, and it was interesting and exciting for us. And really, we took it up as a hobby and something to do, because you went to the youth clubs or the schools that had music on, and you just got interested, and you suddenly realised there was a little bit more than that, and you could make a career out of this, and you found better musicians, and you started to look at it a little bit more professional.
Well, the first record I ever bought that ever really said anything to me, embarrassingly enough, was Freddie Bell and the Bell Boys with a thing called Giddy Up a Ding Dong. But that was a straightforward 12-bar. That was the first record I ever bought.
During the 50s, I didn't take much notice of music because it was so dull. Music was so bland. It was all sort of, Anne Shelton and Vic Damone, and it didn't interest me whatsoever. And then I heard American rock and roll music, and it literally changed my life. I mean, I heard Elvis and Little Richard and Ray Charles, and I thought, wow, what is this? It's just sent shivers down my spine. I just wanted to be in a band, and along with hundreds, thousands of other kids at the same time. I was at school, and you just throw a band together, and it's almost like, well, what are you going to play? Well, I don't know. What do you fancy playing?
And at that time in Birmingham, you had to be very versatile musically, because you had to play every song that was a hit. That's how you got to work.
This was one of the problems that I had trying to find out what rock and roll was. I really had to go and teach myself. And I was fortunate about finding a few people locally who wanted to explore rock and roll itself. And when I was 14, I met Ray Thomas. And Ray knew how to sing a few songs, and I'd learned to play a few songs on guitar. And so we started playing at youth clubs. We were singing, Down the Line, Jerry Lee Lewis. We were doing rock and roll songs. There was a jazz club, I think it was called the Midland Jazz Club, that used to be at the Tyburn House in Birmingham. And my father went along there and said to the promoter, my son's got a band, would you let him play in the interval at no charge? And the promoter eventually said yes. Actually, it wasn't a promoter, it was probably the pub owner. And we went there and we played, and we started to increase the amount of people who were going to this jazz club. it had been for ages 100 people, then suddenly 110 turned up the following week and 120 the week after. And I think the pub owner suddenly thought, you know, this could be good. So he asked if we'd like to do our own night, which we said yes, except that we only knew 8 songs, and he said, well, play them twice.
The band that I formed was called the Saints and Sinners. Ray Thomas was, he was a schoolmate actually, he was at Paget Road School, and he'd always been interested in, you know, in what we were doing. I think he always wanted to be in the group, you know, and Albert Flaherty, the guy who was playing the box, the T-chest bass at the time, I think he decided really that it wasn't quite for him. And the opening came and we invited Ray to join the band, or the group, as it was called in those times. And so whereas the group was formed probably in the March of '58, by the October, Ray was with us.
By the early 1960s, Birmingham was teeming with music acts of its own, most aspiring to do not much more than make a living.
I mean, Carway and the Vikings was there, El Wright and the Rebels, the Modernaires, the Grasshoppers. There were lots of very good bands, Danny King and the Royals, and we all followed one another around to different venues. Mike Sheridan and the Night Riders, we both used the same venue to rehearse. And Mike would come in to me and say, I like that song, can I have the lyrics? Yeah, okay. So the next day, he was learning that song and I'd borrowed one of his. So we were all friendly, and we've kept like that all over the years.
I joined another group, we call them the Cutaways, because we all had cutaway guitars at the time. But Ray Thomas, he went and formed a group called El Wright and the Rebels.
We were looking for a name for the band, and we decided to call ourselves the Rebels. And at the same time, bands were starting to come out of London like Nero and the Gladiators, and they were dressed as gladiators. And Ray and I thought, well, the Rebels, what are the Rebels? They're Mexicans. Let's get some Mexican outfits. And Ray and I were talking one night. We said, we need a name for you. And we came up with, I don't know which one of us said it, El Riot. So it became El Riot and the Rebels. We thought we'd wear all these Mexican outfits with the great big sombreros. But as soon as we became El Riot and the Rebels and started wearing these clothes, we suddenly started going further afield out to Bromsgrove and Leamington and Tunbridge Wells and places like that. And we started to develop, you know, a huge following. It was fantastic.
By that time, there were over 250 groups on the local music scene.
The first band I was ever in that actually meant anything was called Jerry Levine and the Avengers. And Denny Lane was in Denny and the Diplomats.
Denny Lane and the Diplomats, we were very successful in Birmingham. We became one of the top groups in the Birmingham area. We all had peroxide blonde hair, and we were like mock crocodile skin suits, and did anything for a gimmick just to get publicity, really. But it was a good band, and Denny was, you know, obviously a very talented boy, you know.
We were doing sort of a lot of our own material, as opposed to just doing the hits of the day. We got kind of known for that. We actually got to be one of the top 5 bands in Birmingham at that time.
We generally played in and around Birmingham, but occasionally we'd get booked in other parts of the country. And we once had, I don't know where it came from, but we had this gig at Scunthorpe Baths, swimming baths.
Which they converted into a dance hall. And it said on this big poster, Birmingham's top band. And I thought, oh, I come from near Birmingham. I'll go and have a look.
There was this rather rough sort of character at the front of the stage saying, can I sing? And he got a real broad black country accent. Hey, can I come and sing with you, old group, mate?
Well, come on, then get up and have a sing. So we did. We just played to ourselves, you know, on the stage that night.
And suddenly, and then he transforms, this guy, and he puts on this sort of red satin jacket, and he says, can you do any Elvis? And he said, can you do One Night? And went, yeah, okay. And we do that, do. And this guy, he goes, One Night with You, and the best Elvis voice you've ever heard.
And of course, the next thing I know, I got all the girls at the door screaming their heads off because I'm singing like Elvis Presley.
And I mean, and me and Denny particularly were big Elvis fans. And we just went, wow, what else can you do? And we ended up doing lots of songs, Elvis songs. And Denny was totally taken with Nicky James. And he said, you should join the band permanently. And Nicky went, all right.
And I went back to Birmingham that night with Denny Lane and Bev Bevan. We travelled all the way back.
And they ended up having a flat together, Denny and Nicky.
And then it became Denny Lane the Diplomats featuring Nicky James. And that lasted for a good year and a half. And we really did build up in Birmingham, just that time, built up a fantastic reputation, you know.
Nicky was a great singer, but he was really like a, you know, an Elvis kind of, that was a great part of the set. But my thing was, I wanted it to be a little bit more original, you know. But all those influences were there.
Another young local musician, Mike Pinder, took some time away from his musical pursuits to follow in his father's footsteps and join the army.
But what happened was I ended up in Germany, at a camp in Germany, in Bielefeld, and got some guys together. I ended up being a clerk for the captain of our platoon, and so I was able to move around freely. You know, I got to know, and I'd deliver messages to the 4 different company commanders and things like that. So it turned out that the OC at the camp had an organ, and he was very religious, and he wanted someone to be able to play a couple of tunes for his little Sunday services that he would have. So I said, Pinder, would you do it? You know? So I said, yeah, certainly, sir. You know, so I came up and just played a couple of little hymn things for him on Sunday, and in return, he gave us a van, bought us all of the musical instruments we wanted, the drums, the guitars, the amplifiers and everything, and the microphone PA. He also gave us a room to rehearse in, and in that room there was a radio, and Saturday mornings was when we got the BBC broadcasts. And so we would listen to the latest charts and things like that. And I remember hearing, was it Love Me Do, the first Beatles thing? And that just went bingo in my head. And so I went to the medical officer, and because I do have a slight hallux valgus problem, which is a bent toe on my left foot, and I just went to him, I said, I need to get out. He said, oh, okay, Pinder. And within a week I was demobbed, back in England and ready to form a band.
On returning to civilian life in the spring of 1963, Pinder met back up with Thomas, and together they formed the Crew Cats, who were good enough at what they did to get booked into clubs in Hamburg.
The Crew Cats was Ray, Thomas and I. And I befriended Ray and John from the Al Wright and the Rebels band, trying to work as an agent to try and get them some gigs. I liked what they did, and we became friends and everything. And I basically then snatched Ray from that, and we decided to go to Germany, and we picked up 2 other guys, I don't even remember their names anymore, and we went to Hamburg and played the Top 10 Club. I remember after we'd been there about 5 or 6 weeks, doing 5 shows a day, you know, it was killing us, and after, you know, things got bad there, the other 2 guys wanted to split, and we went to talk to the management about that, and they got really unhappy with us, and they went down to the police station and got our passports back, and it got ungültig, you know, not allowed, cancelled visa. They cancelled our visa, so Ray and I started hitchhiking to get across to Belgium to try and get to Ostend and get home.
Once back home, Thomas and Pinder decided to turn professional, and knew that to do it they would have to get the best of Birmingham's best.
Norrie Paramore came to Birmingham and did this thing called Brumbeat, as it became known, following on the Mersey beat phenomenon, and auditioned loads and loads of bands.
To try and find bands that were going to rival the Beatles and Jerry and the Pacemakers and everyone else. And they held all these auditions over a week.
And they decided to do a Brumbeat album, and we were all on it. And we all expected to go like Liverpool, and we didn't.
This idea that Birmingham would follow Manchester and be the next big sound, it didn't work out.
And so what happened was a whole bunch of the bands got really disgruntled and got upset.
So Ray and I started shopping around, and then we got in touch with Denny Lane and Graham Edge.
And I said, well, you know, I'm doing all right as it is, but if I do get involved with a new band, because my band didn't want to move to London, and I knew you'd have to go, you know, start travelling out and go in and find it. And I didn't really want to go to Germany, but I said, you know, well, yeah, but if we can do a blues thing, I said, yeah, fine, let's do that.
It was Mike Pinder and Ray Thomas and John Lodge. But John Lodge, after the first meeting, he decided not to join the band because he wanted to finish school.
You know, Ray said, John, come on, you've got to come down to London and be part of this. And I said, I've got a year to go at college. I really want to finish what I'm doing. And I'm not sad that I didn't go down, not anything, you know, because life is life, you know.
And so it was, we need a bass player. So I knew of Clint. He only lived about 5 miles away from me. And so we just drove over there. Ray and I drove over there one day and just found him at home and said, hey, you ready to do some work?
Very, very pleasant chap. The only married guy in the band. And so he was always very, he was always backing off from any of the more risque aspects of what we were doing.
His real name was Albert Eccles, and he liked Clint, you know, and I said, that's a great name, yeah, you should use that, Clint Warwick. He liked that. It was Warwick, the singer, Dionne Warwick, and the Clint, I think, was from Clint Walker, the actor.
Clint was great. He was real solid, you know, and he could sing the high parts. Ray had a really good voice. Actually, he was originally going to be, you know, more of a lead singer, but my voice kind of lent itself more to that style, and one thing led to another. But, you know, we ended up, and then Mike had a real good, solid bluesy voice and played that style too. So we had a real good little rhythm section going in those days, and we went down really well, you know. But we had the harmonies on top of everything else. That was our signature thing, and the sideburns, of course.
They had hoped to have sponsorship from Mitchell & Butlers, a local brewery, and therefore decided to call themselves the M&B 5.
We called ourselves M&B 5 after the Mitchells & Butlers brewery because they owned a lot of pubs. Now in Birmingham, public houses were really big things.
My mom ran a big pub called the Crossways. It was one of those 7-room massive pub, English pubs, you know, which is now an apartment block. I saw it last year when I visited. And it was Mitchells & Butlers beer. And they had all the biggest pubs with all the dance halls. So I thought, wow, if I could do a tie-in here, this might work.
And so we were hoping that they would love the name and book us into those a lot, which of course they didn't. And then we were stuck with them M&B as the initials.
You know, so I thought M&B, what kind of, and so I started thinking about that. And then one of my favorite things that had stuck with me was Mood Indigo, Duke Ellington's Mood Indigo. Yeah, that piece of music, and I always loved that. And I loved the name of it. It almost like it was predestined in a sense. And so it was like M&B, and I remember sitting with Ray and discussing this with him, and so I said, Moody, blue, you know, M&B, blue, Moody Blues, Moody Blues 5.
This is going to go down on record as the big controversy of who named the Moody Blues. But anyway, you know, I was totally into the blues thing, so I'm sure I put the blues bit in there. And I was probably the moody one, so who knows? But I'm pretty sure I did, so there you go, Michael. But anyway, you know, it doesn't matter. The thing was, it was a great name, you know, and that's the way great names come about, you know. It's different to anything else that was going on. And it kind of gave us a style too.
They made their debut in Birmingham in the May of 1964. Playing a brand of R&B based rock and roll.
It was really doing covers and just playing music and experimenting, you know, playing stuff that we liked and see where you go from there. Hadn't started writing songs at that point in time.
The thing I remember most clearly was how much talent Denny Lane had. He was a great blues shouter, excellent guitarist, did a really good job with a not too great a voice. You can do a great job. You don't have to have a great gift.
They quickly gained the notice and services of manager Tony Secunda.
We were playing at the club one night, and Tony Secunda and a guy called Lord Alex Murray came in, and they wanted to take us to London to record us.
The band then landed an engagement at London's Marquee Club.
I used to go to the clubs, the Marquee, and I used to see Yardbirds every Friday night virtually, and Manfred Mann and all these different bands. And one night they had this new band from Birmingham, the Moody Blues. And they were fantastic.
You know, the first thing the Moody Blues did when we came to London, apart from doing the Marquee Club, which was the blues centre where everybody started, we did the Chuck Berry tour with the Graham Bond organisation, which is Ginger Baker, Jack Bruce, you know, and all that stuff. And then Sonny Boy Williamson, we backed him for a tour.
And we did quite a few weeks with Sonny Boy. That was very, very interesting. He was a ball of fun.
He would be sitting in the van and he'd just get his harmonica and start vamping him. I just happened to have a harmonica on me here. But he would like do things like, he'd go.
And he was going to the half notes and bending them and saying, "Hey man, can you play this note? Can you play? Let me hear you play this." You know, and we'd all be going, like that. We'd look around to him and he'd go, "Ha ha ha, got you again," you know. He was quite a character.
People were being signed left, right and centre. And, you know, they could come and see us play live. This was the thing. So people would come, you know, and say, yeah, we like the band, and then we'd say, well, we don't want to give all our, you know, publishing away, or we don't want to, and we'd sort of this and that, you know, but then we'd kind of go along with whatever the management said, and you'd go along, and then next minute, you know, we're having our records produced by people we don't know, people we don't. So in the end, we thought, no, we want to do it. Well, we signed with Decca, but we want to do our own thing. So that's when we were using our own people.
Celtab, which was our management company, or the Thieves, as we like to call them now, they of course absconded with all our money.
The band decided they would need a base camp and rented a house in the London suburb of Roehampton.
We needed a little bit of privacy or get away, make some music, you know, have a little. So we rented a house in Roehampton. It was owned by an Indian gentleman who used to cook curries for us, you know, while we were out, and we'd come back and the house would stink of curries for like 3 years. But yeah, so we used to have a lot of great parties there.
But it was great fun. It was, yeah, there was an adolescence, you know, to it. But working in a band, gigging 6-7 nights a week, traveling, all of those things, you have to let go. You know, you have to let out that energy.
Anyone you could name in the music business at that time would be at one of those parties. Tom Jones, the Beatles, Stones, you know, Eden Kane, remember him? The Animals.
I can't remember where it was, out in the country somewhere. And there was the Golden Bowl on the way in, with the ladle, and one had to be careful to only have one drink, otherwise I think you know what happened.
We used to make this punch with like everything, a bottle of everything, you know, and of course in Germany you could buy this like pills and speed, you know, so we put a bottle of them in.
One time the Beatles came over to our house. I remember telling them the story because Ray, a few weeks earlier, was woken up in the night, and what had happened was there was the trap window of the bathroom was open, you know, just letting air in, I presume. This girl climbed up the drain pipe and came in through the bathroom window and went into Ray's room in the middle of the night, and I don't know what happened after that. But I do know that when I told John and Paul that story, or Ray and I were telling them the story, that then the next thing we knew was, she came in through the bathroom window, which was obviously connected with the story.
We had a very lively character as our roadie called Phil Robertson, who was a little hard case Scotsman who was a great laugh, but he was always getting into fights. We'd be pulling him out of fights, which we wouldn't start, but anyway. He actually ended up sending the story, I think.
He went to the News of the World and made up this ridiculous story, which wasn't true.
Like George Harrison was seen on LSD jumping in the swimming pool. Well, we didn't have a swimming pool, so we'd have a hard time doing that.
As fate would have it, he killed himself on the freeway, driving about 100 miles an hour, about 2 or 3 months afterwards.
Amazing.
So it was like, bye. Thanks for nothing.
The group's first single, Steal Your Heart Away, released in September 1964, never charted.
The management team took us into the Marquee recording studios. We were the first people to record there. They were still plugging things in, And I remember doing a couple of those sessions.
That was the first sort of recordings we did. We'd had very little experiences of recording, but we'd just go in and play live. You only had a 4-track or 2-track machines. We'd play live and maybe mix it down and put extra vocals on just to fill it out. But it was basically a live band. We'd learn the song, write the song, rehearse it, go in. That was it. There was no weeks in the studio.
Their second single, Go Now, released 2 months later, was a cover of an American single by R&B singer Bessie Banks.
We went from there to having Go Now sent to us. Well, a guy came back from America with a pile of songs, and that's one of the ones I picked on because it was like a slow gospel song. And I said, that's definitely for us, and we'd do it, as part of the set. Of course, with the harmonies and everything, everybody said, that's got to be a single.
That was never released in England, of course, and that's how the management got a hold of that song. And when I heard it, it was like, oh yeah, this is a good one for us to do a cover with. The big chord routine, dang, 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 dang. Yeah, that whole structure there was part of the original record. But the only thing that was different was the fact that I did a piano solo.
That was a phenomenal record. I've got a band now called Bevan's Move, and we do lots of we do all the Move stuff, but we also do what we think are the best songs from the 60s, and we'll do stuff by Hendrix and Cream and the Stones and the Beatles. But we do Go Now, and we do it every night, and it goes down a storm because it's an absolute classic song. Yeah.
But it turned out that we hardly made any money on the record at all because. We woke up one morning in our apartment, and after the record had been a hit, and I called the management, and lo and behold, the phone wasn't connected anymore. And in fact, we went down to the office, and the office was closed, empty. They'd actually moonlighted. They'd actually collected all of the money from Decca because they had a contract with Decca and we had a contract with them. And so they screwed us for every penny.
They were living in very humble circumstances, and it was very difficult for them.
All of a sudden we were on our own, there was no funding, nothing. We had no connection with the record company, so the first thing we did obviously went to the record company and we remember having a meeting with Sir Edward Lewis, and we ended up getting, signed to Decca directly.
Go Now fulfilled every expectation and more, reaching #1 in the UK charts and earning them a berth in some of the top venues in England, including the New Musical Express Poll Winners concert. They appeared with some of the top acts of the period.
It was like in the middle of a football field or something like that. And I always remember seeing the film of that years later and seeing Mike play a bum note. Always, it's there for time forever. But anyway, sorry Mike, I can bring that one up. But yeah, but that's about all there was to it. We were all sort of intense, and we all kind of ran out from the tent and jumped up on this huge stage, and away you go.
When you arrived at those kind of peaks, you're in such a, it's like having a birthday party. You don't really remember what went on in the sidelines. You just remember probably 2 or 3 things if you're lucky.
Go Now also gained a #10 chart placement in the United States. This achievement earned them a place as a support act on the Beatles' final tour of England.
The last Beatles tour we did together, just them and us, and we travelled all around the country together in 2 limos, stayed at the same pubs, the pubs with the hotel rooms up on top. It was great. We got to know each other quite well, had a lot of fun together. They were fantastic.
That sort of was why in later in our careers, we always played it very low key. Rarely put our photographs on album covers. If they were messed with in some way. They were either in infrared or something like that. Because we saw those guys and they had absolutely no life. They couldn't do anything. I remember the one player not allowed to leave the hotel. The police had the thing cordoned off. Thousands of girls from 14 to 16, and you don't know how strong they are when they hunt in packs. That's what it was like, being on the road with the Beatles. You looked at that and thought, this is not a great life.
Suddenly, they were being prevailed upon to deliver an LP, making them the first Birmingham band to be so obliged by their record label. They rose to the occasion with an album named The Magnificent Moodies.
It was called The Magnificent Moodies. We had a great shot of us, and a windmill standing by the water, and it was a kind of a course. But it took a while for that. It trickled. It was kind of an underground thing.
It sang with the influences of James Brown, George Gershwin, Ellie Greenwich and Sonny Boy Williamson.
The Moody Blues were the first band I ever saw. I saw them in, I think it was 1964, on Worthing Pier. And I was 13 or 14, and I was gobsmacked, I suppose is the way to put it. It was wonderful. I mean, it was a gig, and it was really exciting. They did Go Now, and they did all that, the albums stuff. I bought the single, 3 and 11pence, whatever. Then I went and bought the album after that, which was great. Totally different to what they did later, because there's things like It Ain't Necessarily So on it and things like that. But I loved it.
The whole thing about the Moodies, having such a big hit, was you had to follow it up.
And they were having great difficulty finding material. They were encouraged by various people to write their own, which was hardly what people did in those days.
And we were touring, we were working so much on the road by then that we didn't really go into the studio enough. And my thing was, I wanted to get them in the studio, but no, well, we need to make some money. We've got to go and do this work in Europe and this and that. So I was really like, the one who wanted to get in the studio. Now, we put out a couple of songs which, I Don't Want to Go On Without You, which was a Drifters cover. We put out From the Bottom of My Heart, which actually was very influential towards the direction the Moodies went after I left, because it had that big sort of screamy ending, that fluty sort of thing, and dramatic, I Who Have Nothing sort of vibe,
From the Bottom of My Heart only reached number 19 on the UK charts following its release in May of 1965 and barely touched the US Top 100. By the summer of that year, their income was dropping steadily and the bookings were beginning to dry up, forcing them to spend more time on the road covering ever greater distances to make up for the shortfall. Ultimately, the grind of touring, coupled with the strains facing the group, became too much for Clint Warwick, who had a wife and a new baby to support, and left the group in the spring of 1966. By that August, Denny Lane had decided to leave as well.
When he left the Moody Blues, it was a shock to me, but Denny would have a reason for doing it.
Denny was, at that point, was moving into this other area, and he wanted to do some different ideas that he had. So it seemed to me like, well, that was a good opportunity for him to try something different.
He asked me to go with him, but I decided to stay with the Moodies because, frankly, it was bloody hard work. He was such a perfectionist, and you just run the song and run the song and run the song and run the song, and it was loads of ideas. It was very challenging, but it was exciting.
It was always about being original for me. It was always like, you know, being experimental and not thinking too much about hits, because that was kind of, you know what I mean? It's kind of corny to kind of be in that rut, I think. And that's one of the things, again, that being from that kind of background, that kind of writing, you know, more of an artistic background than sort of trying to be a pop star, you know, which kept us down a little bit.
For Warwick's replacement, the band turned to Ray Thomas's old El Riot bandmate, John Lodge.
Talk about timing. We immediately said, John, you know, and we called John, and he was just finishing his last semester, I think it was.
Ray rang me up one day and said, John, we've got a problem with the band as it is. Would you like to get the old band back together? He said to me, have you finished college yet? I said, yes.
I mean, I've known John since, I think John was 14, you know, we played together. I was 15, John's 14. A long time, you know. So I mean, I know he's playing where his head's at backwards, just like it does me. But,
you know, they've worked together all their lives, and so we were just short of a lead guitarist.
Ray went down to Bagonel's, I think it was, one evening, and he ran into Eric Burden.
Eric was forming a new backup band called the New Animals or whatever. And when he picked his lead guitarist, he gave us, I think it was Ray he gave it to, gave a whole sheath of applications from various lead guitarists, and out of that we pulled Justin Hayward.
It was Justin, yeah. And I can't remember that. I mean, I can't remember sending him on his way to the Moody Blues. But that's a story that's sort of developed in the States.
Talk about putting in your thumb and pulling out a plum.
Born October the 14th, 1946, Justin Hayward had been a proficient guitarist as a boy, and in his mid-teens was already earning part of a living as a member of a trio called All Things Bright. At 16, he left school and became a member of a band backing the UK rock and roll star, Marty Wilde.
I left school after getting the 5 O-levels, which is sort of obligatory for your parents, and my parents were always wonderful and very supportive of me, and then they said, right, you go and do what you wanted to do. They knew that I wanted to be a musician, and all I did was answer a load of ads in the Melody Maker, and I answered one that said named singer requires guitar player or something like that.
He was a shy sort of guy, and I thought, well, he's all right, but there were other guys there who I thought were possibly better, but my wife didn't think so. My wife thought that he was potentially he had star quality, and of course my wife was proved 100% right. But and I mean, to be a bit, you know, I didn't want someone at the time. I was a young man myself, and I didn't want someone who was too good looking, of course. And but he's a a good looking guy, so I had to watch my laurels on the stage, but that's how it started. He played very well, he sang very well, and I liked him. I liked him as a man.
And I did a sort of quick audition with Marty, and I got the job playing guitar in with Marty, and I was with Marty for nearly 2 years. When I was playing with Marty, we were doing a summer season in Great Yarmouth, 16 weeks I think it was, and Lonnie was top of the bill, and he heard me playing my songs like in the afternoons and stuff like that, and with guys that were in his bands that liked the songs that I was doing, and he offered me a publishing contract.
He had formed a sort of a friendship with Donegan, and he told me that Lonnie Donegan wanted to manage him. You know, I said, well, that's fantastic, because I was going to have to move and move on and to what I had to be, and he was going to move on under the management of Lonnie Donegan.
I'd really turned to songwriting, and I played in folk clubs and things like that, just scraping by, living with my parents. I had a couple of groups on my own as well, and I was lucky enough to meet my friend Martin Wyatt.
Well, the ironic thing about coming into contact with the Moody Blues was first through Lonnie Donegan approaching me at the time to do promotion on Justin's first single, which was London Is Behind Me. I just did a little bit of work on that record. It was a form of independent promotion. In those days it was quite unusual to have independent promotion guys, but I did it. We didn't have big success with the record, but I met Justin only briefly a few times and liked him.
And it's those songs and those records that I sent via Eric Burden to Mike Pinder.
So Ray came back with that list, and we started making some calls, and I think it was something like the third call or something, called Justin Hayward.
And the call from Mike came completely out of the blue, and I had to really think about what it meant and whether that was what I wanted to do. And I came up to London and met Mike.
And I picked him up, and we started driving back out to Isher, and we had a 45 record player in the car. And he happened to have a 45 single that he'd put out. And we popped it in, and I heard that. It was called London Is Behind Me Now, I think it was called. And by the time I heard that, it was, you're in the band as far as I'm concerned. So by the time we got back to Isher, it was like, here's our new guitar player.
I think they carried on doing the old set. When John and Justin first joined the band, I think it wasn't, I don't know the time period, but I think that it wasn't a little bit later on that they started trying to write their own material, and that was Mike Pinder as well. They weren't known for writing their own material in the early days.
Yes, we tried to do Go Now after Denny left, and I had a go at singing it, which was totally wrong. Ray had a go at singing it as well, and it just didn't work.
Despite refreshing the group with 2 new key members, the Moody Blues found that they were still suffering from the same loss of public interest that had begun with the band's previous incarnation.
Our price had really dropped to about 25 quid a night, and I'd gone back to living with my parents. And as a last sort of desperate stab, we did some work in cabaret in the north of England, and in Newcastle through Stockton and Darlington, and all of those kind of clubs. And you had to do a little bit of comedy and something else, you know, to make it work. And on the Saturday night, we were at the Fiesta in Stockton, which was a lovely club, delightful. And but we finished our second set because we were doubling, and there was a knock on the door,
and we thought, oh yeah, great, you know, here we are, yeah, autographs, of course. So knock on the door, door open, yes, autograph, photograph, stand here.
And this guy came in, and he said, I thought I had to tell you. He said, you're the worst band I've ever seen in my life. And we went, what? And he said, you're effing crap, he said, and I bring my wife out every Saturday. He said, it cost me £12.10. He said, and you're rubbish. He says, somebody ought to tell you. Well, I think my bottom lip started to tremble. And I know Ray definitely shed a tear, all of us in silence. And we packed our gear up when we were on our way back home, about Scotch Corner, in absolute silence. And from the back of the transit, I could hear this little voice of our drummer Graham, that was his place right at the back, sleeping on top of the mellotron. And this little voice from the back said, that bloke's right, you know, we're crap.
And we looked at each other, and I've got to tell you, we all looked at each other and says, I agree with that completely.
And literally the next morning we went into rehearsals, threw away the blue suits, that was it.
It was a case of, okay, we need some new material. So Justin had some songs written. I think we all had a few ideas, had a few things lingering over from my days writing with Denny. And we got an offer from a big fan in Belgium, right on the French-Belgian border. They had a nightclub. And he got in contact with us and said, come on, I think I answered the phone actually, and I remember telling him what we were doing. We reformed the band, and we're going to be rehearsing. He said, "Why don't you come out to my club? You can, I'll put you up. You can use the club for rehearsal, anything you want to do." So we did. We took him up on it. So we went to Belgium.
We thought we'd go over there and just write a stage show. We wanted to get on stage and play all our own music, get rid of all the suits, get rid of all the incumbents of who the Moody Blues were, who British rock was. We didn't want to know about any of that. We just wanted to go and make a stage show of Moody Blues music.
Within a very short time of that, the Moody Blues were booked into the Olympia in Paris, and they were huge in France. They took off at Midem, much bigger than people do today. Midem was very, very important in those days. And they, I think, were bigger in France by far than they were anywhere else, including the UK to start with.
Releasing a first demo stereo record, because everything up until then had been mono. And so they called us in to see if we could do it. And we said yes. Tony Clark was the resident producer for Decca at the time, and they handed the project to him.
I was a staff producer, doing sessions every day, morning, noon and night. You're just a roster producer and you do whatever comes at you,
It was very, very nice then. When Derek Barnwell was our engineer, who had done so many beautiful classical albums, and then Hugh Mendel, Uncle Hugh, were the executive producer. We had a pretty nice team there. It was very, very good.
I was the executive producer, which is to say I had to see that it happened. It was my budget that was paying for it, and I was already enamored of what the Moodies were trying to do. I liked them. They're very nice people, all of them were. They were lovely.
The record company, Decca, said, look, we have this ceramic sound system, which is a bit of the Emperor's new clothes, really. It was crossover echoes and various things, but it had the DRAM label and ceramic sound system.
Well, I'd worked on the so-called ceramic sound albums. We'd done about 5 or 6 orchestral albums, which Decca decided that they were going to have a kind of a new stereo sound as a marketing medium, and they got in musical arrangers to do instrumental tracks, middle-of-the-road orchestral stuff, but with this stereo that was kind of symmetrical. It wasn't mono, but it wasn't as widely spread.
They were doing lots of doubles, like a brass band and a choir and gypsy violins and a balalaika band, and to show the range of the system. And they asked us to work with an orchestra, and we were supposed to do Dvorak's New World Symphony.
Based on Dvorak. And I had to go along with this. And I had to sell it to the guys. We go into the studio under this aegis and see what came of it.
They felt that the Moody Blues could do a kind of a crossover rock band into orchestral, and this vehicle was the perfect thing to do the ceramic sound.
What would happen was the orchestra would play the real Dvorak, and then we would do the sort of rock version between their bits. And we said yes, because we had nothing else going at all. We had no other offers, nobody else bursting through the mist to come and offer us anything.
At the time, we were working up what became Days of Future Past as a stage show.
In the course of this, we met a wonderful man called Peter Knight, who's probably the greatest sort of British romantic string arranger, and he was going to do the Dvorak part.
I'd met Peter's son, who was Peter Knight Jr. We actually both worked at Pi Records together alongside, and I knew his father because his father used to do these lovely string arrangements for people like Petula Clark and things, people that I've worked with. So when I knew Peter was going to be working with the Moody Blues, I was intrigued to see what was going to come out of it, but it wasn't It wasn't like epic news at the time. People just heard on the street that they were doing something.
I don't know if it was Hugh Mendel or Michael Barclay said, well, we need to add an orchestra to this so the orchestra can elongate the music to fill an album, a 12-inch album in those days. So Michael naturally thought of Peter apart from anybody else. I mean, any of his contemporaries could have done it, but he was chosen to do it, and he was actually thrilled to bits.
Now, he came to see us at a gig, and what we were playing at the gig was our own little concert, which was like the story of the day in the life of one guy, which was our stage show, what we were doing.
I'd already written a song called Dawn is a Feeling, and Justin had written Nights in White Satin. So we had the perfect beginning and the perfect end.
And that was our stage show. Well, when he came to see us afterwards, he said, listen, he said, I really like your songs.
Bless his heart, he just said, oh yeah, that's much better than, much more fun than Dvorak's New World Symphony.
I remember him telling me specifically how much he liked the Kinks, you know, which came out of the blue, and loved the Beatles, of course. But, you know, the problem for a lot of musical arrangers is they get typecast and put in a pigeonhole, you know. And most of them can arrange anything. Dad was better known for his arrangements of orchestra and choir.
So what about if I orchestrated between your songs using your themes and your original melodies, and you just did your own stuff instead of you trying to do Dvorak?
Tony Clark came back and spoke to me about it, I remember, and that's what really cooked it up. What would they like to do?
It was a way of getting 3 weeks studio time, which was unheard of. And it let us a closed session where we just did Days of Future Past from start to finish.
They were against the establishment. And if that meant they were going to do something in the studio that wasn't allowed, of course they would do it.
We changed the whole way of recording for everyone, because when you recorded, you'd record between 10 and 1 in the morning, 2 and 5, and 7 and 10 in the evening. They were always these 3 sessions during the day. So when we recorded Days of Future Past, we said we'll do it provided we can have a lockout. We'll go in the studio for 24 hours a day and record for 24 hours a day.
We'd go into the studio with 2 songs probably, and the rest were written during the making of the album. And I remember locking people in a cupboard, microphone cupboard, until they'd written a song, which was fun. And they loved it too. Ray loved it. He was allowed tea and biscuits, that's all. And the roadies kept them locked in.
And then Peter had a 3-hour session with an orchestra live to record his orchestral parts.
What he did was he literally, he listened to what we'd done, and then he would lift the melodies out of that and then orchestrate them. And he was wonderful at it. I mean, he knew exactly which were the lines that would work.
The music was to segue from one song to the other, and therefore Dad wrote an overture, and then the linking music, which also had to modulate so it matched the key of the next song and so forth.
And they'd cross over for a few bars at the end, but he never actually played when we were playing. A lot of people think that the orchestral sounds you can hear on the Moody's is him, but it's not, it's the mellotron. But he dovetailed it all very nicely and gave us that gift, because he was stuck at the place. He got something to lose, we got bugger all to lose,
I think Peter Knight sort of enhanced what they had in their minds to do, probably a little bit the way George Martin's influence musically was with the Beatles at some points. I think that the band had these great ideas musically, and Mike Pinder, had ideas as well about sounds, using the mellotron at that point and keyboard sounds. I think the strings just enhanced some of those things, but I think they were tastefully done and complemented it. Who can say whether without those strings, whether it wouldn't have worked? I don't know.
This then was delivered with our own title, which we'd called it Days of Future Past, our stage show, was delivered on the Monday morning to Decca, and they said, well, it's not Dvorak.
That came up and they were all going mad, and there happened to be an American Walt Maguire was his name.
That would be Uncle Walt, yeah. Walt Maguire was head of London Records in New York, and he loved us, and we loved him. Wonderful, wonderful man, and we got to meet his family and have dinner, and he took us into his home, you know.
And, they're all going, where's Dvorak and all this, and he said, oh, I don't mind you guys, but give that to me, and I could sell that in America.
I think he was as responsible in the early days for the excitement over the Moody's as anybody.
Otherwise it may not have seen the light of day, so we owe him a great deal.
So they put it out. It was a budget price album, first of all, and then it started to take off, and they soon put it up to a full price album. And it's since become really the biggest Moody's selling album, and I suppose it always will be now.
I don't quite know whether it quite reaches the level of fraud, but it was a conspiracy, yeah.
Days of Future Past became a hit in England, propelled up the charts by the single Nights in White Satin, the inspiration for which had come from another song on the album.
Mike Pinder, our keyboard player, had written a lovely song called Dawn is a Feeling, which he asked me to sing, and I was singing it on the road.
Dawn is a Feeling came at dawn one morning in my apartment in Barnes, and I had this beautiful hand-painted red upright piano, which someone out there has still. I've heard things about the piano, over the years. Oh, it's still around, But I remember writing Dawn is a Feeling. It was at dawn, and it was 67, the beginning of late 66, early 67, and Flower Power was upon us. And so one of those late nights, which was greeted by the dawn. I was sitting at my piano, and it was Dawn is a Feeling, a beautiful ceiling. And the smell of grass just makes you pass into a dream was not meant to mean marijuana, actually. It was sleeping in a field, lying in a field of grass was the actual concept, although it did fit very nicely with the current teenage activities of the time.
And I just liked the sentiment of it, and I was trying to write he was writing about the dawn, and I knew I was going to start off with the night. And like I say, I sat down on the side of the bed, and it literally took 5-6 minutes to write. A lot of things that were going on in my life, young love, and all people who are in love have a huge desire to tell the world about it, I suppose, and which was certainly my case. I was at the end of a big love affair, which I thought was devastating, and at the beginning of another one, which was wonderful. And all of these thoughts went into the song. And the next day I took it to a rehearsal room in Barnes, where we were rehearsing up some songs, and I played it to the other guys, and everybody went, yeah, it's all right. And Mike said, play it again. And I played it again, Nights in White Satin, and he, on this wonderful instrument called the mellotron, went da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then from that moment, from that little bit of arrangement, I could see it.
Nights in white satin, never reaching the end. Letters I've written, never meaning to send. I've always missed with these eyes before. Just what the truth is, I can't say anymore, 'cause I love you.
Nights in White Satin I recognized immediately as a very, very powerful song. And the arrangement that I came up with was everything that I wanted it to be. The whole changes from the brass in the middle section and then back to the strings. And the single line, da-da-da-da-da-da, all those lines, it just seemed to me like the perfectly balanced arrangement. I was very, very happy with that.
It was immediately obvious when we were laying down the backing track that this was a very grand number. The mellotron was quite new then, and it was always a problem, certainly with new instruments and certainly with the new technology as that was then, to try to get it sound really sweet. And this number, being a gentle number, although dramatic, needed to sound quite sweet, and that was the battle, which possibly led to the foundations of the Moody Blues sound, which was this smooth, grand sound that Mike could get out of the mellotron.
And I think we did it in about 3.5 hours. And I remember nobody in the control room at the beginning of it and about 15 people at the end of it. It was packed out.
It was absolutely stunning. When they finally mixed it at 2, 3 o'clock, whatever it was, and they called everybody in who was part of this project, we all sat and listened to the final mix, and it was, everybody was stunned. I think it was total silence.
It's the first time I've ever felt that is a hit. You know, it's a stone cold hit. And I went out to my car, which had a flat tire, I remember, and I didn't care. We made a hit, you know.
It's a timeless kind of song, you know. Everyone's dream is to write a standard, and I think that song is a standard.
The record kept selling steadily and hooked directly into the aftermath of the Summer of Love, and the LP was timed perfectly to fall into the hands of listeners who were looking for an orchestral, psychedelic recording to follow albums such as The Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
Once we got Days of Future Past happening, it was that was the beginning. That was the font, you know, that provided everything we needed. America loved it right off, and I think that was really the main reason for our success, our second try at success. I think America really liked it.
In America, to hit America, you have to come in with something that they haven't got at the time. They did not have a Moody Blues at the time. They did not have a group like that. They had other groups, but not exactly like that.
On the first tour of America, we were invited over by Bill Graham to play first of all at the Fillmore East. But we didn't have any money to get home, and our next gig was 10 weeks in the future at the Fillmore West in San Francisco. So we worked our way across America. We hired a U-Haul truck and a station wagon, and we picked up gigs as we went. We got in touch with a New York agent who found us some work, and we did a lot of the things that used to be called love-ins and sort of free festivals and that kind of stuff, and the psychedelic clubs. During that time, American radio had just started to become dominated by FM, or it had started to become FM, and moving away from the AM stations. And the FM DJs just loved our stuff. It was just because it was the first stuff they had that had a real stereo picture, that they could use their own stereo airwaves to the full.
The first thing I ever noticed in America was getting into a limo, and it was playing FM stereo as a matter of course. And the Moody's was designed in stereo. It was my major ambition for the band that it be stereo and no backwards phasing. And that's what we stuck to. And it was ideal for those FM moments, you know.
So by the time we'd got to California, we'd really created quite a buzz.
Not to say that Europe and England didn't like it. No, that's not the case. I mean, we were out there and the audience definitely changed, and there were a lot more girls, we noticed, you know, coming to the shows. And then, of course, it just started building up and building up. We finally had a viable product.
Their record sales there were treble probably what they were anywhere else. They could play to 4 times the size of audience, mainly because they had the stadiums and the arenas in the States long before we did, and so they spent much more time in America than they did here. There was a period, probably something around 6 to 8 years, where they hardly worked here or Europe, because financially it was so much more viable to be in America.
We found ourselves in sympathy with the generation because we were that generation. So we were living through the same things. We were fortunate to be part of the swinging 60s in the middle of London, and then to be fortunate enough again to be in the middle of San Francisco in Haight-Ashbury doing all that stuff while that was going on.
With the debts from their lean period wiped out and their music back in demand, they went to work on a follow-up album, and in 1968 delivered In Search of the Lost Chord.
In Search of the Lost Chord was our excuse to just get on with whatever we could imagine. And hence, you've got sitars, tablas, all sorts of things going on. We started to put it together, and we believed in what we were doing. It was very pleasant indeed.
The Search of the Lost Chord came from that song, I'm the guy that found the lost chord. Jimmy Durante.
Jimmy Durante.
See, that was another childhood memory, and that's where the In Search of the Lost Chord came from.
There was a myth that Decca didn't want the Moodies to make another record with an orchestra. This is complete afterthought. I don't know where the idea can have come from. If they had wanted to, I'm sure they would have done so.
Somebody picked up a double bass, played it, and it was Mike Pinder, and it worked. And I thought we got the makings of the smallest orchestra. And I hired a lot of instruments for In Search of the Lost Chord. We had a hire company we virtually made. We hired so much stuff off them. I became a millionaire, I think. We had percussion, we had timpani, we had cellos, basses, arco, bowed bass, you name it.
And the idea was that the Moody Blues would make a Moody Blues album, orchestral-ish, but no orchestra. They were going to do it all themselves.
We'll beg, steal and borrow, and we'll get there. And we did. And we used every trick in the book to create this sound, including the mellotron, God bless it.
Introduced at the start of the 1960s as a potential rival to the Hammond organ, the mellotron had originally been used in clubs and theatres and worked its way into rock music slowly. Pinder not only knew how to play the instrument, but had also worked in the factory that built them.
Mike used to work for Mellotronics in Birmingham. He was their demonstrator, and he longed to possess one. He had a B3 Hammond most of the time, but the idea was to get his hands on a mellotron, which he did.
I worked in every department of the little factory, so that it brought me up to speed of how the machine was invented and made and how it worked and everything. And so the job that they wanted me for was someone to test and time up the tapes. When the machine was built, it would come to me, then I would test everything, align the tapes, make sure that everything was working perfectly, and then move it on the stamp of approval.
On every note, you had an 8-inch tape, and that on the tape would be, I think, 4 different instruments, like a violin, a viola, cello, whatever. And you could select which one of these tracks on the tape it would play. So you'd hold one of the notes down, and you'd get a violin note for 8 seconds.
There were one tape, it was fixed at one end, and then it went down a sort of plastic chute, and it had 2 wheels at the bottom, and it threaded through those. So when you pressed the note down, the wheel contacted the spindle, the tape would then go over and play the note. And so it's literally mono playback of all of these tapes. So it's a giant tape recorder playback, you know.
And it had 2 keyboards. One was a rhythm section, and one was the melody section. And the idea was from Eric Robinson that you'd have the left-hand side playing. You could have a little dance band, but on your own. So you'd have the left-hand side playing the rhythm, and you just pick out the tune on the right. But of course, we suddenly thought, well, if you replaced all the rhythm section on the left with exactly the same that you had on the right, you could have a double keyboard, so you could have strings on the left and brass on the right side. And that's what we did. And as soon as Mike started playing it, it was like, that's our sound.
In Search of the Lost Chord had an Eastern influence, instantly apparent on tracks like the Pinder-authored Om.
Hurry, hide, butterfly, as clouds roll past my head. I know why the skies all cry.
Om, I thought, oh, my God, I'm doing a psychedelic track, because I was new to psychedelia, and I'm very proud of the vocals. I think the vocals on there are tremendous, and Derek should be congratulated for that. The multi-track vocals on Om. I think they were actually seeing the Maharishi at the time. They all had their mantra, and they would tell me about it, and I couldn't take it seriously. It was mildly fascinating. And it helped the music. I mean, it's the music that mattered.
And the album also introduced a psychedelic era anthem, Legend of a Mind. Written by Ray Thomas, it utilised the name of LSD guru Timothy Leary in its lyrics and gave the band an underground credibility to complement their two pop hits, Nights in White Satin and Tuesday Afternoon.
Again, Mellotron features quite heavily in that, and it is pretty psychedelic.
Timothy Leary's dead. No, 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 he's outside looking in. You know, what does that mean?
LSD and all that. Who knows?
I used to hang out with Tim Leary years ago. Actually, Tim told me that if I ever told anybody this, he'd deny it, but the last time I saw him, he said the song made him more famous than he did.
Certain members of the group have since admitted that they were at the time indulging in various hallucinogenic substances.
I certainly did. It became part of my life for a while, and until maybe 10 or 12 trips, and I thought, well, that's probably it now. I've probably done it. And I'm really glad that I did.
And I think out of that comes this wonderful innocence that makes you write songs. Beautiful song, Timothy Leary's dead. And it's all because they were tripping out of their minds, you know what I mean?
It works in terms of if you were an artist, you would end up with more pastels. You know, you would end up with more color varieties because we would notice the subtle differences. And it's the same with listening to music. It's, you know, you always enjoy your music most when you're in a meditative state. And so I think, you know, the drug influence was able to put you into that meditative state, you know, instantly.
Personally, I wasn't of that persuasion. I mean, I've had hash browns because I was hungry and then wondered what the hell was happening. But that was a genuine mistake. It always seemed like you've got to land this airliner, you know, and somebody's got to stay awake to land it. No, and I didn't even drink beer in those days.
Little time and inspiration to generate their next LP, On the Threshold of a Dream, in 1969. They turned towards science fiction and Western classical music as inspirations for that album.
They felt they were embarking on something else. You know, this album was you're walking through the doorway. We're progressing along. And threshold was a great word.
We were speaking about ourselves too, as well as what we thought, or at least what I thought was happening on the planet. You know, in terms of on the threshold of a dream of humanity, you know, to actually become what President Jefferson said, which was that one day we'll all be artists.
By then they knew that they had the time and the clout to really get polished up. And I think that at that stage, certainly people like Ray and John, and to a lesser extent Mike and Justin, they were still really flourishing their early youth in songwriting. So all the best quality songs were still inside them.
On the Threshold of a Dream and its follow-up to Our Children's Children's Children were magnificent achievements, utilising their multi-instrumental skills and the full capability of the studio in overdubbing voices and instruments.
The one I felt strongest about was To Our Children's Children, which was I wanted to get an album made before they landed on the moon. And we just about did it, I think. That was purely a space concept.
The concept came first, and the songs were written to fit the formula, which is fine because the concept is always in the lyric. So, you know, if you get told you've got to make a story about progression of the human race expanding, going outwards via a space journey, if you like, and references to astronomical features, etc. You know, there's all that kind of thing. And of course, man was expanding out of the Earth to the moon.
Although the head of Decca, Sir Edward Lewis, and most of the company's hierarchy loved the Moodys and what they were producing, some of the executive community at the label were less responsive to the band members' creative efforts. From In Search of the Lost Chord onward, all of their albums had been elaborate gatefold designs.
We developed the gatefold. The double album sleeve existed, but we developed the one because we liked the big artwork, where you just had one album, but you had a double sleeve, so that you had the nice big piece of artwork.
At one point, they considered joining forces with their Decca label mates, the Rolling Stones, to form a label jointly with them, but that notion fell apart.
Because the Stones were on London and Decca the same as we were, so we were thinking, collaboration. Not musically, but collaboration in terms of using our strength to get a studio, or to have some more control.
Oh, we did, but Keith blew us out in no time. We went and had a meeting with him, it lasted about 20 minutes. He's going, what do you want to do that for? Why don't you just keep changing record companies and stick them for a couple of million a time? You know, look at his lifestyle and mine to decide which of us was right.
Instead, with Sir Edward's encouragement, the Moodys decided to start their own label named Threshold Records.
Decca were encouraging people to take more control in the production. It was a change in the business from when you used to have people A&Ring a recording and overseeing everything that happened to a lot of bands at that time. In the early 70s was like kind of assuming control and were saying, I'd like the sleeve to be like this, or I'd like to use this producer, etc.
What we were lacking was control over our own masters around the world, control over the releases, control over how the sleeves were made and that kind of stuff. And we went to Decca and expressed this.
Instinct told us that this was a good thing to do. I briefed Walt Maguire and said, I expect you to be on my side, and he was. And we then went to Lewis and said, they would like to do this and we want to do it. Never a word of opposition.
We held on and made sure, and from then onwards, that all masters were the length they were supposed to be and they were the EQ they were supposed to be. You could have somebody monkey around with it in New York or in Los Angeles. Well, we stopped all that. So I did a lot of travelling around, making sure the master was the master. You know.
It was called our own label, it was called Threshold and everything, but really it was just, now it would be called a production deal. You know, we produced the records, did all that, and they had all the distributing. But we were, the idea was to take it away from the various departments that they did have.
And they set up this office in Cobham, really more or less to sort of run the band from a touring point of view and look after their affairs. And they actually got involved with the sleeve design, and they actually signed other artists to the label.
We had a few other artists on it. I produced a couple of things. We had a great group called Trapeze as well, that I still know to this day, great guys. The only problem with it was that, what I didn't realise was that if you controlled your own record company and you were having other artists, you weren't necessarily talking to the artists, you were talking to their managers and agents and things like that.
The thinking behind it was we knew what an artist required, and we thought, let's give these artists a really big break and give them what nobody gave us. And the first thing we discovered that happened is the other artists put you firmly the other side of the desk. Sat you firmly the other side of the desk and treated you like suits. So we didn't like that very much.
My manager said, why don't you go and see the Moody Blues? They're all your old mates. I said, no, I'm not going to, I don't want to go and get a deal on Old Pals Act or anything like that. He said, well, you don't have to do that. He says, go in, he says, make your demos, take your stuff in, get an appointment. He said, don't tell them who you are. And he said, I'll do it. So, went to see Jerry Hoff, who was the main man at Threshold, and played him the stuff. And he said, I really like this stuff. I love your voice and blah, blah. And I thought, oh, great, I'm off. I said, but the one thing you got to do, I said, if you play to the Moody Blues at their next meeting, which is a couple of days' time, please don't tell them who it is until they've heard it. And then if they hear it and they say, we want to sign this guy, then that's okay, then you can tell them, which is what he did. And sure enough, he did a meeting, played the stuff, and Mike Pinder, I think it was, and I think Ray Thomas. Oh, I love this, love that, love this, love that. Oh yeah, definitely sign him up. Who is it? Nicky James. All the cigars hit the floor at the same time, you know.
We got so involved with the business side of it, after about 3 or 4 years, we found ourselves all in the same train carriage, coming back like commuters one day, with briefcases and things, with papers in them, with contracts and things like that. We just started laughing at one another. We packed it in.
That was a period of my life that I don't pay a lot of attention to. That was not one of our better moves.
I think it's like everything else. Unless you're on the ball, on top of that all the time, that dream turns into a nightmare.
But Threshold was still a great concept, and it still holds a lot of those old copyrights and the masters of many of those great albums. And it's always a good idea for an artist to have control over his releases and his masters and his sleeves.
But even as they freed themselves up creatively, the group found that they'd painted themselves into a corner as far as performing musicians, thanks to overdubbing, Lost Chord, Threshold of a Dream, and Children's Children were essentially the work of 15 or 20 Moody Blues, not a quintet, and they became unable to recreate their sound properly in concert. Therefore, in the recording of A Question of Balance in 1970, the group began reducing their reliance on overdubbing and in the process toughened up their sound.
Well, one of the first numbers that we did was Question. And that was a huge step forward in, the dramatic concept of the song, as it turns out. I mean, fundamentally it is 2 songs.
We would book studio time through Decca well up front. If we had like a couple of weeks gigs, we see a few days free, and there was a weekend free in the studio, and we penciled it in. And it got to the Friday night, and I knew everybody was relying on me to come up with a song that we could record and not waste the studio time on the Saturday. So it gets to about 2 o'clock in the morning on the Saturday morning, and we've got a session that starts at 10. And I still hadn't got the song that the others were expecting me to come up with, but I did have 2 songs. I had this outrageously fast thing with a big open C tuning. I wish I could do it here, but this is just a normal tuning guitar. But I had that, and then I had a sort of slow ballad thing. I'm looking for someone to change my life. And I had that, which was my chorus, and the rest of the song written, but I didn't feel that it was complete, nor did I feel that this outrageously fast one was. So I thought, I wonder what happened if you would put them together, do the slow bit in this big open tuning. And I went to sleep with that idea, came into the studio the next morning and bluffed my way through it. I said, I've come up with this thing, but it stops in the middle and goes into this other part that's really slow for 2 minutes, then it comes back again. And everybody went, great, fantastic, da-dum, da-dum, and we were off. It was just brilliant.
Why do we never get an answer when we're knocking at the door? Because the truth is hard to swallow. That's what the war of love is for. It's not the way that you say it when you do those things to me. It's more the way you really mean it when you tell me what will be. And when you stop, think about it, you won't believe it's true, that all the love you've been given has all been meant for you. I'm looking for someone to change my life. I'm looking for a miracle in my life. And if you could see what it's done for me to lose the love I knew, safely lead me through.
They were very brave to consider putting that in their live show, because I know it's a showstopper, but it's you know, you really need to be psyched up for that. You need a couple of bottles of Lucozade before you embark on that one.
They were able to do most of that album and the following record, Every Good Boy Deserves Favour, in concert with impressive results.
Well, it was a case that where I didn't worry about, I didn't care or go there in respect of how they would reproduce it on stage. I just went for the jugular, really, just go for the maximum effect. But then they would rehearse and rehearse to do it on stage. And Mike did everything you could expect of a mellotron, just with guitar, bass, vocals. They pulled it off. They just sounded right on the night.
Hayward and Pinder were the two most accomplished songwriters in the group, and in the early days, they helped the others with their composing.
Justin and I definitely encouraged everyone in the band to write, and including Graham.
I'd turn up with a few fumbling notes on a piano and a lyric, and they'd turn it into a song for me. It's very generous of them.
It's all down to karma in the band with a K. And whoever comes up with the idea of the song, it's their song. And you're part of the Moody Blues. Your part in it is to have the respect and love of that other person, to say, I'm giving you all this. You know, I might write 3/4 of the song, but I'm giving it you because I know you'll give me something back. I know that because that's how we work. And so like Ray doesn't play any chords at all. So Ray would come and say, I've written this song, and it goes, whatever. And it's his song.
Oh, everybody's writing their own songs anyway, and they just put them forward for the album. If they go through the committee, everybody likes them, and we're away, you know.
They should have got half of every song except Little Guy. That was all mine. But all the others, they should have got half, but they didn't want it, you know. Bless them.
By 1971, their music had evolved past psychedelia into a more accessible, almost pop variety of progressive rock. Meanwhile, a significant part of their audience were not content to think of the Moody Blues as merely musicians, but rather as spiritual guides.
I remember coming home to my house after a tour. We'd just finished the tour. The day I arrived home, there was some people asleep on the lawn at my home. And they told me that I was flying the spaceship to save everyone. And I was saying, well, yeah, but what spaceship? Oh, but you don't know, you know. It's like, it will be here. We're just telling you now, you will be piloting it. And, you know, we're all vulnerable, we're all susceptible, we're all, just a minute. Do they have something here that I don't know about?
I think a lot of people in America, more so, I think some of them in England, but I think more so in America, read into the lyrics different meanings. Whether those meanings were correct or not, I don't know, but I mean, that's the great skill of lyrics, that people read into them what they want to see.
We were contacted by a local paper down in San Antonio in Texas and said there's a guy here who's outside the gig and with placards saying 59 days to go till the Moody's come and play here for the first time, when the world was going to be saved. Hallelujah, it's going to be peace and love and everything's going to change. The fascist regimes will be overthrown and da da. And then it became quite a story, and every day he was on the local news, and we were being basically kept informed. And then when we arrived at the gig, he was there and worshipping us, you know, quite respectfully. And, oh, you guys, you know, you're going to deliver to us the kingdom of the future, and it's going to be great, you know, one day to go to the Moody's. And we did the gig, and it was great. We had a wonderful time. We went to visit the Alamo and all the sort of other things that you would do, and it was just lovely. But it didn't really please him, because the world didn't end, or the world didn't really change. And the next day, when we were going from the Holiday Inn to the airport, there he was outside our head. You fraudsters, you imposters! You are not the Messiah! And, so I'm afraid we let him down.
I think that's why eventually I wrote a song called I'm Just a Singer in a Rock and Roll Band. Is I know nothing more than anyone else, probably no less. But all I do know is I can get on stage and sing my rock and roll. And I think people accepted that as well.
By the early 1970s, Lewis gave the Moody's permission to turn Decca's primary studio, which had fallen hopelessly behind technology, into the Threshold studio, designed to their specifications.
Sir Edward Lewis, the chairman of Decca, gave us studio number 1 so we could build our own studio. We built our Threshold recording studios.
As they prepared to record their next album, Seventh Sojourn, in 1972, the strain of touring and recording steadily for 5 years had taken its toll.
We were exhausted. Mike was starting to have a lot of problems with going on the road. He didn't like going on the road, he didn't like staying in hotels, he didn't like that side of it at all. And, you know, he was holding us down to, he would only go on the road for 11 days and stuff like that. And we were in the process of running out of steam.
A lot of it was done at Mike's studio, which had been a garage a few weeks earlier.
And then we finished it off at Tollington Park, a studio in Finsbury Park. And also it was the first one done 16-track.
I was very pleased with that one because it was tighter. I thought the recording was better. The instruments were, I mean, just an overall shine to it. I really liked it. But also the fact that I came up with the titles nearly always. And in this case, it was one of mine. The Seventh Sojourn was once again my reaction to looking back over the previous 6 albums and thinking, you know, where are we today? It's our 7th sojourn. It's that 7th time we've visited this place, and we've set about creating this, these pieces of music.
I didn't play that album because I was going through a divorce at the same time, and so it was very, very painful for me. Once it finished, I didn't play it for years and years. Never played it. Not that I play our stuff very much anyway, but I never ever played that one. And I hadn't really heard it apart from the songs we did from it, or the song we did from it, until it came out first time on CD, and I had to listen to it digitalised just to sort of say, yeah, that's fine by me. And I thought, well, actually, that's not too bad an album.
And by the time 1973 came, we were actually chartering 707s. For 5 of us, a tour manager and our agent. And we were doing world tours with 707s. But our conversations between each other had stopped because we'd known each other from 1966 with all our own egos, our own ideas, our own environment, our own persona. And that's what made the beautiful mix, I think, of the Moody's. But by the time 74 came, we'd lost that. We'd become really too close.
When the Moody's drifted apart and made no plans at all, I first of all went to stay with Mike, actually, in California, and we talked about recording. And then John joined us, and we talked some more about recording. And then Tony Clark joined us too. And then we talked about maybe not recording.
We all went around getting new experiences. I attempted to sail around the world, didn't get past Ganja. I'm in the West Indies.
They were happy getting on with what they wanted to do. Ray recorded Mighty Oaks, and Graham recorded Kick Off Your Muddy Boots, and I was really pleased that they've done that, you know, because we are all musicians, and it was all released through Threshold, so we were all sort of having impetus of how it could all work.
I made the promise. We all went and did our own album. Sure. I came to America, and you know, that was it. So okay, we'll make a solo album. Why not?
But we had one great thing. We managed to get rid of all the bits we didn't want, but we kept Threshold Records. And that was like the pivotal part for us all. Although we weren't working together, we were all relating to. So we all had projects going through our own record company.
During this period, Hayward and Lodge recorded a very successful duet album called Blue Jays in 1975.
I came back home to England, and John and Tony Clark and I just thought, well, why don't we just do it ourselves? And we had this wonderful studio at Threshold.
And the first album Justin and I made there was the Blue Jays album. And we recorded that album there, and it was, you know, incredibly successful.
Amid all of that activity, Justin Hayward unexpectedly enjoyed the biggest hit of his career, with a song that wasn't even written by him. He had participated in 1977 in the recording of The War of the Worlds, a concept album conceived of and produced by Jeff Wayne.
I decided to do it. I went down to this lovely little studio called Advision behind Oxford Circus, and I met Jeff Wayne, who was putting together this whole album called The War of the Worlds, from the H.G. Wells story. And Jeff had done it in the right key for me. He'd done all the right kind of instruments, worked out all the parts, and it was probably the easiest record I ever made, and it's a song, Forever Autumn, that's really took me around the world as a solo artist as well, and met people that I would never normally meet.
It was a major awareness as far as crossing into a different market for Justin, with having a hit single and his own name as Justin Hayward. Then people recognised who he was, as opposed to being a member of the Moody Blues.
The double LP became the biggest selling soundtrack album ever issued in the UK. By 1977, the members had decided to reunite, a process complicated by the fact that Pinder had married an American girl and moved to California.
The Labour government just got back in. It was like December, I think it was, 74. The Labour government got back in, and I felt very, very disillusioned. Plus, I was married to a very nice American girl, and it seemed like, you know, go west, young man. You know, and hey, it was 8 hours, you know, by 707 Jumbo, 8 hours away. And I thought, you know, that's no different than getting picked up by the limo, you know, 2 hours before the others, or whatever it is. It's like, yeah, if I need to do something, if I need to get together, I'll hop on a plane, or you hop on a plane.
The ones of us who lived in England came back together to put together a greatest hits, which of course Decca demanded, and which was called The Very Best Of, or something like that. And we found that we were really enjoying our company. This must have been about 77. So it was one of those things, hey, and Tony Clark was very up for it. Hey, why don't we just do a few little things?
We thought it'd be a great idea, take us all out of our environment of Cobham and Esher and London. All go to Los Angeles.
The five worked from Los Angeles in the making of the album, titled Octave.
And we went to the record plant down in Hollywood, and we started there, and then the place mysteriously caught fire. And I actually saw the tapes being carried out and put in the car park on TV.
including my masters for The Promise, which were in storage at the record plant, and so my masters went up with that too. But we arrived there, and the place was in tatters.
Absolutely everything that could go wrong making an album went wrong. And, you know, different guys in the band, their marriages collapsed and they're separated. And Tony Clark, who was producing it, his marriage went wrong. And so he was, you know, his mind was elsewhere.
And Tony Clark was going through severe domestic problems. Deeply broken heart kind of severe. In fact, I don't think he ever really recovered. And so that album had its problems.
And I had this beautiful 60-acre ranch in Malibu with a beautiful brand new 24-track studio in it. Everything we needed.
Which Stevie Wonder had been using, and it was thoroughly equipped. So we ended up there. But it was difficult. It was 1,500 feet up in the hills of Malibu and up a dirt road. And I remember one night it was so washed out. I led a torchlight procession. We couldn't take the car any further. We had to go on foot. And why we had a torch, I don't know, but we made it the rest of the way up there to Indigo Ranch to do Octave.
So managed to get them to come up the hill, and things didn't go well.
We got hit by the worst mudslides ever, and you know, basically the studio almost fell into the canyon.
They'd never had rain like it in living memory. The roads are washed out. People's swimming pools would be hanging out over the Pacific Coast Highway with no soil underneath. It was dreadful, and Justin and I were in a car crash because the mud was so deep. I mean, we're talking 9 or 10 inches of mud with the whole thing trying to head for the Pacific. And we were in a hire car, and Justin was driving. I was in the passenger seat, and I saw a car at about a mile away. It was an E-Type Jaguar. It was night, and this car got nearer and nearer, and we actually collided at the lights. There's no way, no traction. You couldn't stop, and I think the police came and arrested Justin for about 3 minutes. He was in the back of the black and white, being interviewed as an alien. But then it was all fine, and we went on our way.
And I started to question, in my part of my philosophy and calm and everything, I started to question the whole thing about, should we be making this album? And at the same time, punk was the biggest thing that was happening around the world, especially in England. So I wrote a song called Stepping in a Slide Zone.
He went to find a shooting star around the bend, that's where they are. I went along just for the ride. Suddenly I began to slide, standing in a slide zone. I could be stepping in a slide zone, standing in a slide zone. I could be stepping through a time zone.
The resulting album seemed to be more the work of 5 individuals than a unified group.
Justin had already got a song already written and already got a guitar part down, which was a very monotonous part. It was a good song, but the guitar part was very monotonous, and it went all the way through. And I tried putting some mellotron on there and some piano, and it was like, nothing fits with this. It just isn't happening, you know, so I didn't know where to go with it. Things just got, they just sort of went downhill. I think they thought maybe I wasn't able to do it anymore or something, but it was a song that was like, you know, you can't put strings to everything, you know, and it just wasn't working out, and I was getting frustrated. And I remember Graham coming up to me one day while we were there, and he just sort of let me have it. His opinion of what was going on, and he couldn't have been more wrong.
I don't think anybody was particularly happy with Octave. It was done under great duress. I was going through a personal crisis. And we were far from home, which was unusual for a long time. A year away from home, which I wasn't used to. And I felt we'd come to some sort of crossroads. That's all I can say, really. And it stopped at that point. Sad, but true.
At the point with Octave where things got bad, it was like, I don't want a part of this anymore. You know, if it's not all fun and love and happiness and getting along with each other, then I don't want to be a part of it. So I ended up not going to the sessions anymore, because it was like, why do I want to go somewhere where I'm going to be unhappy? And so I just stayed away.
I think there was a feeling that it was over. This was it was like Octave was okay, it's a comeback album, but then it's finished. Well, the rest of us didn't feel like that. The other four guys didn't feel like that.
It had been a wonderful 10, 11 years. When you expect it to just be an album and it turns into 8 of them, that's a wonderful ride. And I'm glad, I'm very proud of what we did. They're all my favourites, and I'm very glad we did what we did. And it was driven by this Birmingham blues band, you know, which went on to bigger things.
Well, we managed to get through the album and we released it, and it went platinum.
Pinder was ultimately unhappy enough to decline going on tour with the band, instead choosing to concentrate on family duties.
Being on the road's really difficult, and trying to hold a marriage together and have a family. I didn't want to put my wife and my kids through that. I'd already tried it. It was tough. Very, very tough. So it was like, no, there's got to be a better way. Sure. You know.
He lied because he said he was going on the road and then didn't. We worked together for 10, 12 years or whatever. Just tell us the truth. Don't say, yeah, we'll go on the road. You get it all set up and then say, I can't do it. In the space of 2 phone calls, he spoke to Ray Thomas and said, I'm going. He spoke to Justin an hour later and said, I'm not going. And we got it all set up and all that. Yeah.
I was really annoyed that Mike didn't want to go on, and that he wasn't writing lots of great songs that I could play on and show off my guitar techniques on. And but that's life, and you mustn't expect people to be what you want them to be. You just have to. I respected the courage that they had to take that decision and to say that's it for me. They're very brave.
Having been away from the limelight for half a decade, Decca decided that as well as a tour, Octave would also require a suitably flamboyant launch party.
And the original plan apparently had been that it would be launched in America because they were spending a lot of time in America. The record had to be released simultaneously. And about a week's, 10 days notice, I believe, we were given this job of launching this album in the UK. And it was quite a difficult task because, it flew in the face of what was trendy and cool at the time. So I just decided that as they were kind of rock royalty, I thought, well, if the Queen can have big garden parties and stuff, why didn't we do a big garden party for the Moody Blues? It was spring, so we did smoked salmon, champagne, and I just went completely over the top, which is what they were. And I knew that would probably annoy people like NME, but I thought it would make a bit of a splash, and it would also help in America and in other countries. I mean, really, London was the last place you wanted to be launching or relaunching the Moody Blues at that particular time. We just tried to make the event as big as possible and as over the top as possible, so that it looked, although I only had about 10 bob as a budget to do it with, but from Decca, we're not too lavish. But so one of the ideas was that we were trying to accentuate that this was a world release. So we got all the motorbike messengers we could find in London, printed these tabards with the Moody Blues written on their backs, and then at the sort of simultaneous launch, they came roaring out of the rhododendron bushes picked up an album package to take off to the radio stations and to the press and send off around the world. Apparently every ad agency in London that day was going crazy because there's not a motorbike messenger in London to be had. I think we had about 120 of them. Of course, I knew the Moody Blues as, you know, absolute legends, but I'd never actually met them until just before the planning of this release. And in fact, I never did ever meet Mike Pinder because he didn't show up on the day, which is another huge problem for us, because having set up this enormous launch to say the Moody Blues are back and reunited, you know, he didn't show on the morning of the gig, stayed in America. So I thought, well, because they're not exactly fashionable at the moment, none of the press we might not notice. So we contrived that if we brought out Tony Clark, the producer, as another member, and I did the introduction quickly, nobody would notice that there was one missing.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back Justin Hayward, Graham Edge, John Lodge, Ray Thomas, the Moody Blues. And please welcome the chairman of the Decca Group of Companies, Sir Edward Lewis.
Because it was a bit of a contradiction that they're all back and one's not there. But then Sir Edward came on and let the cat out of the bag.
7 platinum discs will be presented to each of the 5 gentlemen here, which makes 35, and there'll be the disc for Mike Pinder, who unfortunately couldn't be here, is in Hollywood.
The Octave tour went ahead without Pinder, with ex-Yes member Patrick Moraz brought in to take over keyboard duties.
We didn't want a replacement for Mike because, you know, you couldn't replace Mike. I mean, you can't replace anybody in the Moody Blues. But we wanted someone else to perhaps just show a different route, you know, someone who had got knowledge of all the technical side, because, you know, at that time, the technical side of keyboards was just exploding. You know, I mean, every week there was a new machine coming out. And, you know, we knew of Patrick and we thought, yeah, Patrick, it'd be great. And so I think we just rang him up, said, do you want to come play keyboards?
I think Graham met him first, and then I remember at the Threshold Studios, all sitting around trying to do an audition of Patrick with us, and all getting very embarrassed and self-conscious. And I said to him after about 20 minutes, do you know any of our songs? And he was Swiss, Patrick. Yes, of course I do. So I said, oh, right, okay, I never thought of that. Right, well, do you know Tuesday? Of course. So Tuesday afternoon, we played Tuesday afternoon, and it was nice, and it just worked.
The Mad Swiss Git. Yeah. Oh, he was exciting, he was volatile. It was my first experience, we do it all the time now, but it was my first experience of being on stage with people that are sidemen, not actual integral members of the band.
He was a sort of flamboyant, colourful, eccentric person on stage. I can remember that part of him.
Patrick was, you know, totally different. He had that Brazilian, Swiss sort of, you know, that. But me, musically, did it ever work? I didn't think so. That'd be brutal.
It was the group's next album that proved that they still had a future. Long Distance Voyager in 1981 restored the unity of the band's early 70s albums and seemed to pick up right where Seventh Sojourn had left off.
Yes, the Moody Blues didn't really come back together, in my opinion, until Long Distance Voyager.
We decided to go back to no pictures again on the artwork of us. And we were trying to, we had a photograph session in London trying to get the right photograph to represent the album. And I can't remember who saw it, but someone saw one of these lithograph prints on the wall at the photography studio.
It was like a street scene, a Dickensian street scene with a guy playing, and there was a Punch and Judy there and a musician, drummer by the side of him. And the sort of drummer with the one-man band by the side of him, because we were talking about Long Distance Voyager, and I could see the Long Distance Voyager, instead of that being some guys said it was a spaceship, it was the Gemini craft or the Voyager spaceship that was at that time. I thought, well, it's probably that little guy. He's the long-distance Voyager, and there he is, this little one-man band. So this picture I found out belonged to some foundation in Glasgow, and got permission to use it, and it became the sleeve of Long-Distance Voyager, and that in itself became evocative, you know, counterpoint of these ideas of outer space and this very Dickensian thing. And so we actually put the Voyager spacecraft into this picture of this Dickensian scene, and it's in the sky going overhead while this little street entertainment scene is going on.
I love that album because Octave was like the end of what had gone before. The Long Distance Voyager, just because of the album, it was something that just set off. It had been sent off into the sky, just like our album. And it felt as though we were on a new dawn, a new threshold. And that album just really took us right through the 80s.
We had a lot of great airplay. There was a song called The Voice that came off. It was top 10 in America, another song called Gemini Dream. And it was the beginning of a rebirth, of a new sound of the Moody Blues, a real step forward that was invigorating and wonderful.
The 5-year hiatus had the rise of a new generation of critics, and with the emergence of punk came a decline in audience and respect for various progressive rock acts of which the Moodies were considered part.
Well, that's the way it seemed to be. It was almost as if people were embarrassed to say we were their favourite band at the time. I don't know why, there's something about us that people get embarrassed about liking us. I think because we were considered preppy.
They classed them as sort of a bit pansy, I think, quite frankly. You know, I don't know why. They were just different. You know, perhaps okay, a bit soft for some people's confession, i.e. to Zeppelin and or to Deep Purple or something like that. There's also a jealousy thing as well. Now, it wasn't so much brought from America, it was brought from here. It was the English press. They were more against them. The American press were very much for them, overall. I think they did a good job at the time and filled a big hole for the Americans, especially. They're still popular in America today.
The media, the critics, whoever, can't put you into a nice little safe pigeonhole, because the whole world really in media, I think, is about being safe and safety. Yeah, and the Moodies, no one can put us anywhere, because they'd say, are you a country sort of rock band? Are you a heavy rock band? Are you a folk band? Are you an underground? Are you progressive? Are you psychedelic? And the answer to that is real simple. We're all of those with the Moody Blues.
Some of the music we've made is very strange and very deep and sometimes very troubled and disturbed. But that's part of expressing yourself truly with sincerity and without compromise.
When the punk came along, of course, it just blew everything out of the water, and everybody suffered, especially the Moody Blues, but they still were able to go to the States and still continue their career and everything else, and their music is so good, and their ardent fans, they don't desert them, and as you know, Americans hang on to their pop idols a lot longer than we do over here, you know.
I think in America they'll be remembered quite highly, right? In the US, I mean in the UK or Europe, you know, so, oh, them? You know. But unfortunately, that's what the UK press did. They tended to forget the Moody Blues after about 75.
I think the problem with the UK is that the band don't get the publicity that they deserve. In the United States, they get much better publicity. Therefore, they are much more popular in the United States than they are in the UK.
Hayward, Lodge, Thomas and Edge were still writing, but without Pinder. The album seemed to be reaching for purpose and meaning. Also, his would-be successor Mraz was seemingly unable to contribute to the songwriting process. The other absence felt was that of Tony Clark, who also left after Octave, and it was clear from the albums that followed that they never found a permanent replacement.
Tony was a great producer at that time in our life. A great strength, and like this sixth Moody.
Tony was the sixth Moody Blue. Yeah, he had as much to do with it as any one of us five.
We were looking for a new producer. We've never found one. And we were very, very concerned about trying to produce it ourselves. We were worried that would produce extra stresses and strains which would put too much stress on the relationship and maybe be detrimental to the survival of the band.
Took us a few years to sort it out, how we should do it, but by the mid-80s we'd got it right.
The release of The Present in 1983 seemed to portend disaster, demonstrating a band that was out of ideas and had no reason to record other than just going through the motions. By 1986, the Moodies decided to expand their onstage lineup and brought in keyboard player Bias Bushell to complement Mraz during live performances.
Patrick, bless him, was still feeling a bit miffed and wasn't that keen on actually assisting this little upstart who'd come in and stuck his keyboards all over the room. But in the end, we worked it out. It was fine. But initially, when we were going to do Nights in White Satin, I can remember going up to Patrick and saying, "Now, can you just let me know what it is you play on this, and so I can fit it around in it?" And he looked at me and he thought, "Right, I've got him here." He said, "First of all, in the left hand, I have the double basses, and I have the cellos, the violas, the violins." Went through everything. He had flutes, he had trumpets, he had everything. Covered the orchestra. And looked at me like, "Now, think of an instrument you can play." And he'd forgotten the harp and the piano, so that was it. So that's what I used to play.
The downturn in the group's popularity ended with the release of the Hayward-authored single Your Wildest Dreams in 1986. It was boosted to the upper reaches of the charts by a well-received promotional video that went into heavy rotation at MTV. Combined with the follow-up, I Know You're Out There Somewhere, the band's concert attendance shot back up. But the two albums accompanying these singles, especially the second one, Sur la Mer, seemed to show a new creative impasse in the group. Even with their mid-decade chart successes, the Moody Blues were no longer at the cutting edge of music. By the end of the 1980s, they were again perceived as a nostalgia act. Patrick Mraz departed as the band entered the 90s, with Bias Bushell moving up to primary keyboards and Paul Bliss joining to fill the gap. They took on Gordon Marshall as a second drummer on stage to support Graham Edge.
I was slowing up a little and I could not deliver full out for the full 2 hours. I was starting to not be able to give it. And if you're trying to pace yourself, it just doesn't work. And so we got him in, and he carries, on some songs, he just carries me up. I'm not miming, I am playing, but I'm just riding him and enjoying it and going on, so that then the big ears, I can really let rip and give it everything I've got. And he's a delightful chap. His technique is better than mine. I think I've got a better feel than him, but his technique is better than mine, and he could have, when he was younger and brasher, he could have tried to embarrass me and show me up, but he never did.
The addition of these new members also heralded a new era of concerts, beginning with a night at Red Rocks in 1992. For the first time, the Moodies began appearing on stage, supported by an orchestra. This meant the Moody Blues were able to present some of their most elaborate classical songs, including large sections of Days of Future Past, in their full glory live for the first time, and allowed fans to experience something they'd been unable to for the previous 35 years.
We were persuaded to do this concert, and we met the conductor of the Colorado Symphony, which is a wonderful symphony orchestra. There was a guy called Larry Baird, who'd also grown up on the Moody's music, knew it all.
And I remember when Days of Future Past came out, I was going, wow, I would love to do that. This is just what I wanted to do, you know? And so ending up working with the Moody Blues on this project was just sort of like a full circle for me to come back to it. So it's real rewarding and challenging.
And said, listen, what we've got, first of all, is Days of Future Past, because we're not going to use the orchestra as, that's the thing I didn't want to do, use an orchestra as like a backing group, as a string section of all of these guys. Rock groups often make that mistake. And they wonder why it doesn't work, because you can't hear them.
Ideally, you're not really changing the rock and roll. It's sort of, you're adapting two different mediums together. And obviously on some songs it works better than others. But the way I worked on this project is you take the original recordings that the band had done and then see how you can add the orchestra to it. And in some places, the orchestra actually takes over entirely, and in other places, you're sort of accompaniment to what the band is doing.
But we had this one classic album where the orchestra had its own hits and pieces of music that were recognizable in their own right.
I had assumed, I think like probably most people did, that the music would be coming from Days of Future Past, which was their classic orchestral rock fusion. And apparently none of that music, if it's around, nobody knows where it is. And Peter Knight, who had written the arrangements and conducted the orchestra for that album, has passed away. And I don't think anyone really knows where those charts are.
Larry Baird had to rewrite the whole of the orchestral score because the Days of Future Past orchestral score was not available or could not be found or did not exist.
So we overcame any logistics, filmed it of course, and recorded it. And it was just a magnificent night. And to see, and the reason was that all of the classical musicians were totally up for it. They knew those orchestral parts from Days of Future Past that Peter Knight had done. They were familiar with them. And to see them at the end of the concert sort of waving the bassoon over their head, yeah, and totally getting into it like rock stars, it was absolutely wonderful. And it was a thing that was in 1992. And it gave the Moodies another kind of kickstart in the career, really.
Well, that took on a life of its own, didn't it? That was sort of 25 years of Days of Future Past, and it was only meant to be a one-off. It was meant to be a video and a one-off because it's a difficult thing to put an orchestra together. But the video through PBS just took off like mad, and every promoter wanted the orchestra. Because we never ever intended, and we certainly never intended it to. How long did that last? 7 years?
Their catalogue was amongst the best-selling parts of the Polygram library, shifting an estimated 500,000 units every year.
The fact that that we're still selling 500,000 albums a year is testimony, I think, to the longevity of the music, because it had something special and it was designed to be that way.
A new studio album, Strange Times, followed in 1999. As a live act, they continued to evolve into the 21st century, adding Bernie Barlow as a backing vocalist and keyboard player, replacing Bias Bushell.
I'm singing backing vocals, and sometimes I'm doubling some other parts and playing some keyboards when I'm on stage with the band. I sort of feel, you know, I'm riding a little on their coattails. It's really their glory, and I'm just happy to come and do my bit, really. It's great fun. Great songs, good times. It's not really like a job. It's just good fun.
While Paul Bliss, who has now been with the group longer than Mike Pinder, became the new primary keyboard player. In 2002, Ray Thomas retired.
Yeah, I think he just wanted some time off, is what I heard. And the next thing I know, they'd organised a tour and we're out on the road without him.
He has 2 separate illnesses. They're not life-threatening, but each of them requires rigid control of your diet. And you can't do that on the road.
I mean, they do work hard. They generally, they're touring sometimes 3 times a year in America. So, although, you know, it's well oiled and they do it, you know, in a very smooth way, it's still time consuming out of your life. The travelling, the hotels, all those bits and pieces, rehearsals.
And you know, I'm sure fans out there who watched him struggle in the last 3 years must have felt really badly for him, as we did. But he just couldn't carry on. It's a tragedy. He's badly missed.
Ray used to have a couple of spots in the show that was, you know, tore the place apart.
John's written some marvellous songs, but Ray's are just out there with the lyrics, and the ideas of them are so amazing. And the fans know this, and they always want him to do more. So when he left, I mean, I know the fans missed him like mad, and when he left, nobody said he'd left, and they were just sort of saying, "Oh well, he'll be back." Or
I do miss him as a more as a chap and a friend. I miss him than inside the group, because I don't believe his heart was in it in the last few years. But in the mid-90s, I had a solo album out. It's called The View from the Hill, and it did okay and had some success, and it took me around the world and made a lot of friends with it. But I did a showcase in Los Angeles with a girl called Norda Mullen, who plays flute and guitar and sings.
I had done a Bugs Bunny on Broadway thing on piccolo for Warner Brothers, and I believe that either Justin or the agent, Robert Norman, went to a conductor who had conducted me playing piccolo, and he said, "We need a flutist that can really play but can look the part of a rock and roll flutist instead of looking like a classical," you know. I don't mean to criticize classical musicians, but you know the look. So this conductor said, "I've got the perfect name for you," and I think Justin or whoever said, "Give me 20 names," and this guy said, "This is the only name you're going to need."
Because when you're replacing a flute player, where do you find a rock and roll flute player? There's one. It's probably going to be on this series, isn't there, that everybody knows. And funnily enough, I did meet Ian Anderson only recently. I've known him for years, but we met again recently in Germany last year.
I think it was it 50 years of rock and roll, big TV show in Germany, kind of 3-hour special covering the whole deal, from Bill Haley and the Comets to the Rasmus or whatever was current at the time and on the show. And I discovered the Moody Blues were on, and I knew that Ray Thomas, flute player, had left, so I thought, this is my big chance. You know, if I ask nicely, maybe they'll let me play. I'll get to play flute in Nights on White Satin, because I figured that's the one they would do, which of course they did. But my heart fell when I saw that standing next to Justin Hayward, there was a rather attractive young lady flute player who'd been enlisted after the demise of Ray Thomas. So I have still no chance.
He came up to me in the corridor with this thing. He says, "Why didn't you ask me when Ray left?" And I said, "Well, it's just the solo, you know." He said, "I've always wanted to do that solo." So whether he meant it or not, I don't know. But I remembered Norda, this girl, and she's from Mississippi. She's Irish from Mississippi. She's a wonderful combination. I found her in Los Angeles doing a lot of session work and film work. And she'd been brought up on the flute parts of the Moody Blues.
I had 5 older siblings, and they were, since I did grow up in Mississippi, I was influenced by a lot of different kinds of music, but my older siblings were all kind of hippies and going through their whole 60s things, and one of their favorite bands was the Moody Blues. And I remember a particular time when one of my sisters was having a party when I was maybe 12, I guess, or 10 or 12. And I wasn't allowed to go to the party, but it was going on in the next room, and the door was closed, and they kept playing this album, I guess it was Days of Future Past, that has Nights in White Satin on it. And this song kept coming up, Nights in White Satin, and I had my flute with me because I didn't have anything to do. I couldn't go to this party, so I sat and figured out the flute solo from Nights in White Satin. And that was the first time in my life I ever realized I could play by ear on the flute, and that I didn't have to read music to play, because I'm very classically trained. So that was a real awakening for me, because it kind of freed me up as far as the music reading thing. And how ironic that it was Nights in White Satin, which now I get to play nightly with these guys, and it's quite an honor.
She knew all of the parts. I found her, we got together in Las Vegas, I think. I introduced her to the rest of the guys, and it was fantastic.
But it worked great. I had about a month to learn the whole show, because that's when Ray, I guess, had told them that he wouldn't be joining them. And then we rehearsed for 4 straight days in Philadelphia, and it went just fine. It was great. It's been a blast ever since.
Well, this band is so lucky. Where on earth do you go and find a classically trained virtuoso flautist with the heart of a rock and roller? I mean, how did we come up with that one? Yep, not a plum.
That rock thing, which again, I don't even know if I'm that good at it, because it's very, very hard. Like I said, when you've been trained, it's so hard to to back up, you know, and to just do a whole different style. I mean, maybe it's not so hard, wouldn't be hard for Ian Anderson because he wasn't trained classically, but I think when you're trained in such a regimented way, it's very much a challenge.
It's always been a difficult instrument to integrate into rock music because it's an acoustic instrument. It's not easy to amplify, and you just basically have to play it as loudly as you can into a microphone.
We rehearsed for about 4 days in Philadelphia, and then it was the very last day that it occurred to me, because I was so busy with the project I had, which was to learn. I play rhythm guitar, and I have to sing backgrounds, and I have to learn all the flute stuff, and it really didn't dawn on me until that very last day, and I just said, Justin, you know, I don't know. I mean, I'm replacing Ray. They're going to hate me. You know, they're going to throw tomatoes at me. And he's, oh, you know, he said probably some funny comment. I can't remember, and it really did scare me. And I was very sensitive to that, because I'm sensitive anyway, but I was sensitive to it. And, you know, the first tour was very rough, and I was very insecure about it. And I would notice, I can see people, we can see a lot more than people think we can see. And I could see their reaction, and sometimes it wasn't good, you know, and then they just kind of wanted to hate me for whatever reason. I don't know why. I mean, it wasn't like I locked Ray up in a closet and said, you're not going to do this anymore. I mean, it was Ray's choice, you know. But they kind of treated it like it was my problem, my idea, which it just so wasn't. So then I just decided, you know what, I'm doing this. I've been hired for a job. It's a professional job. I'm just going to think of it in a professional sense, and they can have whatever problems they want to have. But then by the second tour, it all just kind of flipped, and they just somehow decided just to like me. And now it's great, but it was definitely difficult at first.
Lean on me, I'll be there whenever you need someone to share in every breath, in every dream you left somewhere. Till tomorrow will be just like it was when we were young.
Today, the Moody Blues continue with the core trio of Hayward, Lodge and Edge.
I couldn't foresee a Moody Blues without the present three who are in there. I think they, personality-wise, they're very, very strong. Mike Pinder went his own way. He was a very talented guy, but he went his own way. Ray just had enough of touring and wanted a quieter life. But I think if any more of the boys packed it in, maybe there wouldn't be a Moody Blues. But certainly right now, you've still got three of the original five, and yeah.
They've had an incredible renaissance in the States. I guess same here. I guess, but I noticed that touring full tilt again, and they're always on the playlists on American radio. So yeah, they are definitely alive and well.
The amount of people who know about them. If you say the Moody Blues in a Piggly Wiggly supermarket down in Georgia or something, if there are any in Georgia, they know who you mean. The most unlikely people. I mean, old people know, young people know. Exactly how that works, I don't know.
They try to spread themselves as far as they can across the United States, and they've been to just about every state there is.
The band's devoted followers have been kept up to date over the years by various fan clubs and fanzines.
There's one called Higher and Higher that is beautifully put together.
The brainchild of Mark Murley and Randy Salas, Higher and Higher has continued to be an invaluable source of Moody's information.
It has nothing to do with the group at all. They've usually got it spot on.
I think the reason that they sustain that sort of audience appeal both here and in America, I think is because they give the audience still what they want. I think a lot of bands went through phases. I'm not saying they're all doing it now, but I think they went through phases where the bands were saying, I don't want to do those old songs any longer, I'm bored with those. I'm going to do the new album and slip in a couple of the old ones. In the Moody's set, and I know it well, you've got all the evergreens in there. If anything, they only slip a few of the new ones in. I mean, the audience sort of comes away having heard what is current with a couple of new titles or so in there. most of it is all the things they've always wanted to hear.
I think they've always given a great show. It's always been a good valued 2.5 hour show, and I think something comes across the footlights that they care about their audience. They're very attentive, and the audience react to that. They know, and what we get now is a lot of their original fans bringing their kids to see them, maybe grandchildren as well.
Some of their songs touch me on a very personal level, and I think you'll find with most of the fans that that's why they follow them, because something they've done or have heard in the Moody's music has touched their lives very deeply, and they have mine.
The Moody Blues fans are pretty interesting. They come all shapes and sizes, all different walks of life. I mean, one minute you'll have a judge that's bumping into you and saying hello in a hotel lobby. I'm coming to the show tonight, and then the next minute, you know, a guy who owns a tire store. I mean, there's so many different types of people, all pretty nice people.
There's something about their music that touches deep into the soul, I believe, and it's a universal thing.
Well, I think their music is ageless. I mean, their music is so inspirational, and I think a lot of people have used that music to get them through hard times or to just enjoy happy times. And I wanted my son and my grandson to have that, to share the love for the music that I had. And so I've taken them to 3 concerts, and my grandson when he was 5 and 7, and just last summer when he was 10. And they love them.
You probably would be amazed at how many of them they actually know by name and can speak to. And they spend a lot of time after shows talking and communicating with them. I mean, much more than a lot of other bands that I know would give the time to their audience.
I think they respect the fans a lot. You get to see them and be with them. We were in New York City and they played outdoors for the fans. And so the fans are still there because they appreciate us.
I know they did a concert a couple of years ago in Monaco, and they actually, a lot of the audience, the people went from the States to that show. They flew over and they made a long weekend of it to go to that show. And I take my hat off to the band, because the band then did a kind of reception the next day at a hotel for the audience that came from the States, and walked around and saying hi and did you enjoy the show? And they loved it. I mean, their faces were a joy to see.
We're offered more gigs and more work now and more travelling than ever we were before, and I'm amazed at that. We could work 365 days a year. I'd love to meet a record company executive who was as interested in our future as our past.
The most important thing for me is to maintain a karma about the music and about what I write about. I always want to be able to say that in 20 years' time, this was then, we've gone way past that. I always thought that when I write a song, if I can really still believe in that song 20 years later, I've achieved something. And I'm not talking about material achievement, I'm talking about an inner peace, something different altogether.
I think sometimes when things are great, it doesn't hit you over the head. It is subtle, and it's timeless. Their music is completely timeless in several ways. I think musically it is, as far as their symphonic aspect to their rock music. I think their lyrics, I think Justin Hayward is an amazing poet. I mean, it just never ceases to amaze me, his lyrics. And they're universal type themes. It's not like a rock band that's saying dirty words or talking about some girl. You know, it's very across the board, universal. It's almost like great Shakespeare or something. Everyone can relate to those feelings.
They represent, I suppose, part of my professional life, but part of the great revolution that took place in popular music, and that's something of which they must be very, very proud.
I think the one thing that strikes me about the Moody Blues then and now is probably the word class. Not a social class, classy music. You know, they seem to be people who had the ability of good tunesmiths with a presentation which was confidently classy.
There is an endless fascination with the sort of 60s and 70s. I wonder how long that will continue, whether it'll just be translated to the 80s and 90s. I think it's probably true that people love the music of their youth, and that stays with them always. the dilemma, I think, for all of the people that are in this series of programs now, that this series of films, is that they're all people with a past and an uncertain future, really. And for me, that's what's exciting about it, because I'm only really interested in the uncertain future. Because when I was a young chap and just starting out, I didn't have a past but an uncertain future. And I kind of can handle that. It's at the same time, we have this fascination with the past of groups like the Moody's or the Cream or Yes or the Floyd, where you have to keep explaining yourself, and the more you explain it, the more you develop the sort of myths and mystic around it, because you're forced to answer questions. It's like Nights in White Satin. If it had just been any of the other songs, I'd have said, well, I remember kind of writing it, but not much. But I've had to focus on that 10 minutes in my life so many times.
I've heard Justin interviewed many times about what that song is about, and he seems to be able to tell it 80 different ways.
It is a dilemma, because I'm interested in what I'm doing on this guitar now, what I'll do tomorrow, and what I want to record next.
You write a song and you believe in it, and if you can believe in those songs, they relate 20 years later to a different set of people.
I feel so much that I identify with this music, and it was such a part of my life that I could do it forever. I'll do it as long as they'll have me, and I wish they'd keep going and not worry about getting old or anything, because they just should just go on until I'm old.
I think the Moody's do a really, really good show, and I think it works very well. And I think that they can go on for as long as they want to go on, because the music is timeless.
I think the Moody Blues will continue working as long as they want to, as long as they've got the health and strength to. It is their life, they do love it. Obviously this is not a new band that is just starting out, and they're running from radio interviews to press interviews and really working flat out to start their career. These are guys that can pick and choose what they want to do, and I think they carry on doing it as long as they want to.
I want to work for another 10 years. I don't know if I can, but I'm going to give it a shot.
I think they can carry on, personally. I don't know how much they want to, but I personally, the way I look at it at the moment, they could probably do this very easily. It's got another 5 or 6 years, I should think, at the rate they're doing it.
Lovely as it is, going over the past, it's the future and the uncertainty of it which I find fascinating and interesting. And what should we do? What should people like ourselves do? How should we move it forward?
At the beginning of this tour, for a few announcements, I said we tired with making it the farewell tour, or maybe the comeback tour. But in the end we decided, you ain't never getting rid of us tour.